There we go. All right, thank you for joining us on Worldwide Slot Car Chat number 24, I believe. I'm your host, Greg Gaub. Today we have Kelly Avery, Russ Paver, Mr. Lancelot, Mr. Capaldi, Mr. Kit, Mr. Dennis Sampson, Martin down at the bottom, and another Martin down at the bottom. All right, and we've got Chris and Tony and other people on microphone only. So I got nothing. What, anybody got show and tell they want to do questions, answers?
Can I ask a question before we start? Like just take a quick poll if that's okay.
Yeah.
So are there any particular eras of cars that you guys particularly like, or is it all over the map, or what type of racing do you try to sort of model when you go model car racing?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go because I'm not going to be on that long.
Okay, let Kelly go first because he's going to leave soon. Go ahead, Kelly.
I like American Muscle from like 66 to like 72, and then from the earlier videos, I'm a NASCAR fan, so I like any era of NASCAR. So and that's of course everyone likes luxury cars, but as far as racing wise, American Muscle and NASCAR.
All right, there you go for one. Russ, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm partial to like P68, GT40s. Yeah. Oh,
Ford, classic Le Mans Ford.
So yeah, I mean that stuff. Other than that, all cars are cool, to race. And LMPs, of course, have their place. It's all good. All good.
Right. Thanks, Russ. Lance, do you want to chip
All
in?
the ones you like, I mean.
I'm getting to like a lot of different stuff. Not really in particular, just kind of what a lot of other people are running at the time. I learned to like it.
Sure. I'm pretty much the same. I don't have any. I didn't grow up watching road racing of any kind, so I'll race pretty much whatever we're racing. I do tend to lean towards modern GT, GT3 type cars, Aston Martins, Audis, and stuff like that, just because I think they're cool looking. But I got nothing against pretty much anything. But yeah, if I was to say what type I would be most likely to buy, it would be a GT3 car of some sort, Porsches and stuff like that. Leo, do you want to chip in?
I'm a rally fan rather than a racing fan, so I'm keen on sort of rally cars of any era, basically, modern day and all the way back to maybe 50s, perhaps might be the limit. I'm not sure when rallying started in real terms, but yes, so I'm a rally car fan. Definitely not single seaters. I'm not into single seat racing at all, other than in the real world, one-to-one world, I do follow Formula One racing, but that's the limits of my interest in single seaters. So slot cars, I do have some single seaters, but I really play with them.
Thanks, Leo. And John, of course, you were obligated to answer your own question.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a real fan of 60s, early 70s stuff. That's me, because that's again what I grew up watching and so forth. Open wheel for a number of reasons, but also sports cars, Le Mans cars, especially because in those days you could actually buy a car, drive it, pick up some milk, go to the track, race it, and then come back with spoiled milk and maybe a trophy.
All right, Dennis, on my screen, you're next, and Mr. Sampson,
All right.
you want to tell us what your faves are?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not looking at my camera today because I'm in the middle of a massive order for 1/24 scale weighted guides, so I'm working as I'm listening. In terms of my preferences for slot cars, number 1, Can-Am. Number 2, Can-Am. Number 3, Can-Am. No, not quite. Okay. No, number 1, Can-Am. Have been, always will be a great Can-Am fan. Primarily, I think, because they make really, really good slot cars. Because of the era that did not have a lot of aero yet. So they're big square boxes to make it easy to put a decent slot car chassis underneath.
My second favorite these days is GT3s, like Greg. I absolutely love those things. It was the Corvette C7R, C6Rs that got me back into slot car racing in about 2003 or 4, when I started seeing all these absolutely gorgeous fly Corvette C6s out there, and started buying some, and that parlayed into the current obsession. But I love GT3 cars. Third off, I guess, would be 60s and 70s sports cars, as John was saying, Le Mans. I have a little bit of a feel for some earlier cars, but then it's very, very selective in terms of people, cars that were either ones that I have seen racing, or that were raced by some of my idols, or by my friends. I have friends who used to race full-size cars in South Africa, and I've built replicas of their cars. So that's a lot of just regular salute car stuff, Alpha GTAs, Renault R8 Gordinis, Escorts, things like that. And then the sports cars that we used to see in South Africa for the 9-hour endurance races over November, the European winter time. We always used to get all of those guys out there. So, right, Lola T70s and Ferraris and the rest. I did not grow up with NASCAR, and for which I am forever grateful. And I still don't understand roundy racing. I appreciate rallies, and I have a couple of rally cars in my collection, but and I did some pitting and crewing for rally cars in South Africa way back when I worked in the auto industry, and we had works entries, but they don't figure really big in my collection. In terms of open wheels, I have some Formula Ones, but again, only because they're iconic representations of the full-size cars. I don't like racing Formula Ones, the slot cars. Certainly not in 1/32 scale. They're just too flimsy, and they don't turn me on. So that's me.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And Mr. Martin John, you're next on my screen.
Hey guys, anything that ran at Le Mans I really like. The GT3s, I'm coming to love them. I don't like the look of the cars, but I do like driving them in 1/32. Can you not hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
A bit better.
How's that? Okay,
That's
sorry, I
good.
got the wrong headset on. Yeah, anything that ran Le Mans. I'm beginning to love the GT3s to drive them, but I don't like the look of them. I'm beginning to like the NSR and Polycar F1s. They're nice little things to drive. They're good balances at club racing. And for club racing, laugh if you want to, but I really love driving the NSR Fiat 500s. I think they're fantastic for club racing. You know, they're so tippy. I mean, we have more crashes in one lap of practice than the whole night of Mosler night, you know. And one thing Leo forgot, or two things Leo forgot to say, anything Italian, particularly with a Lancia badge on, that's his preferences.
No,
So, yeah, that's me.
there are limits. Alfa
All right, okay.
Romeo, no.
Oh, I'll disagree with you entirely there. I'm a major Alfa Romeo fan.
Well, let's get
Because
to somebody else.
I drove one for some time, so I know all about it.
All right.
I went from a Morris Mini to an Alfa Romeo GTA, or GTV. So if you ever want to know about bad electronics or bad electricals, I think I had two of the worst. Yeah.
Well, the good news is those cars in scale last a heck of a lot longer than the full-size cars.
I had nearly 200,000 miles on my Alfa Romeo by the time I got rid of it. But
Was there well, hold on though, was there a body left?
No, there was no body left. It was just it was holes held together by rust.
Yeah, there's no such
Let's
thing
move
in
on.
Italy
Let's
as
move on,
carbon
please.
steel.
What was that, Leo?
Let's move on.
Yeah, great. Mr. Dodd, Martin Dodd, you're next on what your favorite slot car stuff are.
Favorite slot cars, we race three types. We race Caterham, then F1, and finally GT, covering all GT1s to GT whatever. All makes, all models. all manufacturers.
Does that align with your personal tastes in slot cars?
Well, I have tried rally in the past, but we didn't feel that we were doing it justice because a track with rally didn't really go unless you got the sort of the dirt and all the dust and that, all the bumps in the roads, and that didn't obviously work well with F1. So we got rid of the rally cars and we went over to Caterham, which are a good little car, which more manufacturers would make more of them.
Is it just K-Electric that makes those?
Yeah, it is, yeah, which is unfortunate because they only make so many runs, which makes them limited editions. And that means they're expensive to buy, which again is a great shame. But yeah, we got about 30 plus Caterhams, 50 odd plus F1s and GTs, 60 plus we race.
All right, very cool. Thanks for sharing. And Mr. Arcade, you want to tell us about your favorite slot car types?
Well, there's quite a wide variety, but I guess my favorite is probably the Ninko Classics. They are such a blast, especially just box stock, preferably with the older motors, not the ones that came out with the NC5s, because they're just a little too fast. And in fact, with those, we typically would put in, I'm blanking on the, I guess it's the Jackrabbit motor, which is a slower little can motor, they're just great fun, especially with the stock rubber tires. Although I do enjoy all kinds of racing, and both full scale and model, but kind of my collection is kind of Lotus oriented, because I actually owned a Europa for quite a few years, so back in the 70s. But these days, I guess mainly we run just about everything, including things like the racer resin cars, which we ran last week. But that's pretty much it. And someone was talking about rally cars. I'm going to try to see if this will show up or not, but let me see if I can get this to go. Come on. Here it is. We used to play with these, 8-10 years ago.
Oh, Ninko trucks?
This is a snow rally.
Nice.
This is a combination Ninko and Scalextric track that we would run a number of different kinds of rally cars. This particular one is a truck that I had. These things were a blast. We put flour on the track, so it really was slick. And you could actually see the snow coming off of the wheels.
Yeah, we've done that a few times as well, and it's great fun. But the flour gets into the interior of the car.
Yeah, you have to do a little
pain.
protection. You have to make sure the motors are sealed and such. But
the good news is 10 minutes at 350, and you've got a slot car cookie.
That's true.
Let's try that.
I'm trying to cancel this now. Okay, I think
I got you. Oh, where is it?
Come on. It's not the fastest machine in the world.
There we go.
Yep, there we go. Okay.
Okay, and I accidentally stopped your video, RK. I clicked the wrong thing, so you have to turn on your video. And a couple more people have joined us. If you're coming in after the question was asked, Graham and Phil, we're answering John's question. Which John, why don't you go ahead and restate the question so I don't mess it up?
Sorry, I was prepared to be muted. Yeah, just with the kinds or era of cars that you like to model and or drive either on your track or with your club, whether it's from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then the type of car, whether it's sports cars, open wheel, rally cars, etc.
All right, Graham, you go. Yeah, you.
Good morning, boys. I'm not particular to what I race. I like the Porsches and the Corvettes. Those kind of things, because that's what I play with in real life too. But I got lots of different cars that I like to do. I have some Formula One, and I only get to set up my track every once in a while. I don't have a permanent layout, so I set it up and then I play for 2 or 3 weeks pretty hard, and so whatever cars, mainly Corvettes, Porsches, cars like that. So.
Thank you, Graham. And Phil, do you want to tell us?
Well, I started off really focusing or specializing in sort of 60s, late 60s GTs, prototype endurance racers. That was 15 years ago. So now I have building a new track, and I'm fixated on an earlier period, early 60s, the US RRC series, and am slowly buying up bodies. In fact, just last night I put in an order with Beta and Classics, and that'll be fun to see what some fiberglass cars bodies look like. And as soon as I finish the track, the intention is to start building them.
Awesome. Looking forward to some show and tell then.
Yeah, those Beta and Classic fiberglass bodies take a little bit of work sometimes. Phil, they're not always the greatest, but they work very nicely when you're done.
Well, Phil knows where to come if he needs any help, right, Phil?
Right. I'll just send him to Dennis.
Send him to Dennis. All right, Nick.
I've done a few over the years, and not by preference.
Oh, he's getting his headphones. We'll skip to Richard, Mr. Modifier. We're sharing our favorite era of slot car and or real car, and what your favorite type of model is to race. Can you hear us, Richard?
Share with you the 5 classes we're currently racing, because my favourites are usually the ones we're currently racing.
Sure.
So the first one, we're racing Carrera Classics. So like the Ferrari 365 P2 and the Morgan +8. Some of them are horrendous. The Corvette just falls over on every corner, as does the Ferrari 166, the Wavo. But the fastest car of all of our Carrera Classics is actually the Morgan. It's incredible. It's got independent front wheels, and it just, without magnets, it's an incredible car. It goes around our track in about 8 seconds, and the track record is 6.9. So, for a standard Carrera motor, that's a pretty rapid car. So Morgan's probably my favorite. We were also just about to start racing some of Maurizio's Polycars, the BRZs. That's a standard color. That is not. But because it only comes in 6 colors and there's 9 of us, we had to do a bit of respraying. These are actually surprisingly, they've only got a 16K motor, and they are the slowest cars on the track, but they're surprisingly good fun and surprisingly evenly matched. When I tuned these two the same and put them around my home track, they went round within a tenth of a second of each other. Which,
very much like the real cars.
Yeah, was pretty good. Next, Btccs. These were a revelation, the Scalextric Btcc cars, because we've had a bad experience with a Mini with a very poor motor mount, very thin moulding, where the motor literally just ripped the motor mount apart. And bearing in mind that's just an 18K Scaly, was pretty poor. But they're in line, and they're actually surprisingly good fun. The fairly evenly matched. I think the BMW the 1 Series has a slight edge, but the Hondas are up there. But they're pretty evenly matched, and Scaly have actually done a decent job.
the tires, I don't know who makes the tires, but they're on Euro standard rims, but they appear to be quite sticky. I find Scalextric's modern tires are actually well suited to sport track, so no need to change it. But you can stick slottits on if you want. But we insist on the original print on the sides because we don't want any unfair advantages. So 2 to go. This is probably the most fun. So these little fibre slots. I don't know whether you've seen the fibre slots, but this is actually a PCB or fiberglass material flat chassis in a kit form with vac formed bodies that go on the top. So this is a Morris Minor. And this one's obviously a Beetle, which I've done up like a taxi. Had to print the decals myself on laser decal paper. But yeah, they go surprisingly well. It's a very stiff, very flat chassis. And almost all of the weight is below the level of the top edge of the tyre. And they go like stink on silly little motors. But he's got a very good design for that chassis because you can actually put a short can and a long can in the same chassis. He just moves the motor holder into a different slot, and the whole thing just clips together. It's quite a brilliant little innovation.
Very similar to the early ProTrack flat glass fiber chassis.
Yes, well, this isn't a traditional flat. This is like a ladder chassis. So so you've got the cross members that slot into machined holes.
Oh, okay.
I can probably find one to.
Yeah, I think the ProTrack one was basically just two side panels with nylon rods across it.
Here's a naked one.
Oh yeah, nice.
So it's quite. He's actually got another module with height adjustable front axle on it, but this was an early one. And I also suggested to them that he actually changes. This is the location slot for the rear axle. He's actually turned it around so it comes up from underneath. Because we find with heavy-handed Marshalls, they can sometimes pop your axle when you slam it back on the track. But if you have it coming up from underneath, that's never going to happen. And the last class, which is the fastest, is the Racer Sideways Group 5. So this is probably my favourite car. This one's actually a custom livery that somebody else did, the Marlboro Lancia. It's a bit twitchier because I think the Sideways there's long wheelbase and there's short wheelbases, and the Lancias are very much in the short wheelbase, and the Porsche very twitchy, especially on a technical track. But the weapon of choice seems to be either the BMW M1 or the Zack Speed Capri, and they're surprisingly good. They're not quite as fast as LMPs around our track, but they're so much more controllable because they've got the flat six motor in them, which hasn't got as much grunt as an NSR King Evo or whatever, but there's loads of mid-range controllability, which we love because you can actually drive these things, you know, with a smooth throttle. We find with the LMPs and something like a 22K King Evo motor, they're either on or off. But with the Racer Sideways, with that flat six, actually they're very enjoyable. I used to finish racing the LMPs and have lockjaw. With the Sideways, I'm actually, you know, my jaw's intact and I'm smiling. And bear in mind, a lot of our heats are 15 minutes, so it's pretty intense. But yeah, the Sideways, we were really lucky. We had this as a class. We actually went shopping in Gaydon 3 years ago with a view to start the class 2 years ago. And all of the Sideways seem to be discounted to £30, which is about $35, something like that. So we had great fun spending our money in Gaydon that day, I tell you.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. And Chris, did you want to toss in something?
Sure, our club races now about 18 different classes, which I find way too much, but most of the stuff we run is sort of gravitated around, you know, 60s, 70s sports cars, GT cars, early Le Mans cars, which we use a lot of the fly bodies and then either modify them or put scratch built chassis. my personal fave, unlike anyone here, is F1 cars, particularly 60s and 70s F1 cars. And like Dennis, I really don't have, sorry, Kelly, but I have no affinity for anything that goes around and around in bank circles. But that's just me. We had a class for it. I voted against it. The club adopted it anyway for a NASCAR class. So, you know, being sort of, you know, you're in the club, you sort of got to build one. So I did build one and we did race it. But thank God after a year or so, we managed to vote the NASCAR class out of the club. So I'm not as a huge fan of the modern LMP stuff. I think they just look too much. They just look too much alike for me. And you know, so my favorite looking cars would have to be late 60s, 70s, early 80s Le Mans prototypes and GTs and stuff like that. So we race a variety of motors, a variety of performance, plastic, scratch built, all over the place. So I like them all. I still have a huge affinity, and it was funny, I just got back from the track that two tracks are being built as we speak. There's a 135 foot 6-lane Polycar track and 150 foot Ogilvy flat road course. So we're still working on those. Once the Ogilvy road course is done, Can-Am retro type cars and Formula One retro type cars, all with vac form bodies, are going to be absorbing most of my interest, because it's what I grew up with, and I just absolutely love those things.
Cool.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. And we were going to circle back around to Nick. Are you able to offer your personal preferences, Nick, Mr. Kurzweil? If not, we'll move on. Oh, here he comes. There you go.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are we?
Doing well.
Very good. Preferences, class preferences. I agree with Richard. The sideways Group 5s are a very good car. We raced those at Rockingham quite successfully. Like he said, the Capri and the BMW M1 are if you want to be in the running, that's what you've got to run. A couple of guys run the BMW 320s. They're a bit tippy. They seem to be a bit tippy, but a couple of them have got them to run well. Slotted Group Cs, very popular. Very good cars, easy to tune, easy to repair. They're good. What else do we run? Polycarp F1s. We run those. The only modifications we do with those is alloy rear wheels and the slotted F22 rear tyres. They run really well, and they're so close performance-wise as well. There really isn't a clear front runner. They're all fairly evenly matched. Again, we run so many classes. I mean, I think we've got somewhere like 18, 19 classes that we whittle around. But those are our favourites, really. Those are the ones that we get the best turnout for.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. And Ray, are you there? You want to chip in your preferences, Mr. Carthy?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. So I like quite a range of things. F1, all eras. I follow current F1, but I also like the 60s F1 cars, 70s, early 2000s. So I've got quite a collection of each. What I'll be talking about are mostly my collections, because I don't have much, there's not much racing around here in North Central Florida. But I'm also a BMW aficionado, so I have a large collection of all types and eras of BMWs. I wasn't a NASCAR fan until a few years ago, when I actually took my 1-1 car to Daytona and drove the track, and realized going through the banking that it takes some big ones to go through there at 200 miles an hour. And I developed a liking for NASCAR, so I've got quite a NASCAR collection also. I enjoy GT3 cars like the other guys do. I got into Can-Am cars when I started collecting Vanquish cars, which I asked about on an earlier edition of this chat. I also like the European Truck Racing Championship. So I started collecting fly trucks. If you've never seen the ETRC videos on YouTube, it's quite entertaining to watch. It's like watching an elephant race. But and I also enjoy Japanese touring cars. Got a collection of those. Endurance racing, LMP cars, Le Mans. I enjoy the GT40s and the Ferraris, and then I just have a whole other collection of really eclectic stuff, whatever takes my fancy. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ray. And I'm, as I stated at the beginning, I'm not a big car guy. Basically, all I know about cars I learned from slot racing over the last 10 years or so. So, question for you guys who know a little bit, because I know nothing. I always kind of understood the slot at Group C. I don't know how long they were called Group C. I assume from the beginning, but they always struck me as more or less the precursors or the earlier version of what we would now call LMP. Because weren't they basically prototype cars? You know, that came before the current
Essentially,
prototype
the
cars?
evolution took from what they called GTP to Group C to eventually LMP. But basically, they're even going back into the 70s with the mid-70s Group 5 cars, they were basically all Le Mans type prototypes because they all raced at Le Mans. At one point, when the Group 5 went to the silhouette version of the street cars, it kind of got the purists at Le Mans upset because he didn't have those sports prototypes that most people really, really liked. So that they had for Le Mans a class that I think it was called Group 8, which was the prototypes again, which like the first one was the Porsche 936, I think it was, which was that turbo car. It was so great looking, and they only had it in Europe, except I think it was at a race at Mosport in '76. I think that was the only time it was in North America. But they were really, really fast cars for Le Mans. But yes, it eventually went to what we call the LMP class, or LMP1, LMP2. But that's kind of the history of it, yeah.
Group C is not a thing anymore, right? Other than, retro, putting cars on there. They don't actually develop new Group C cars.
93 they finished, I think.
There is a class of Group C that is being run right now as a retro class, where those cars have been updated a little bit and they're running in real races. But
yeah, and also the original, like the Group C cars, not only were they really quick, they were really dangerous.
Yeah.
Like
you had the generation of the 962 from the 956, where they mandated more space on the front end to protect the driver's feet.
Yeah, but just they lost a lot of good drivers with those cars.
Well, you had Mercedes, who constantly flipped going down the Mulsanne, which is what they eventually added those.
Yeah, Mercedes was the only team that actually got points from the Russian judges.
Well, that's what inferred the chicanes on the Mulsanne, because they were just too fast.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of stuff even happened in the Can-Am at Saint-Gevit. I mean, that's what happened to the TI-22. They joined the flying club, or the Jackie Oliver driving.
Chris, could you chime in there for a second?
Oh, I was just saying that the car that flipped at Le Mans, the Mercedes that clipped at Lamar was not a Group C car. It was a GT1 car.
Right.
But yeah, the same problem. The Group C cars, I guess the big deals about them were that the whole of Group C was a limited fuel class. That the cars were only allowed to carry a certain amount of fuel, and they were mandated as to how many pit stops they were allowed per hour of racing. And so most of the cars were relatively small capacity turbocharged engines. That is the first thing. And then the second thing was that they were fairly open as far as aerodynamics were concerned. So things like the 962s and the 956s had a fair amount of underbody aero, which one or two of the manufacturers like Ford didn't get into very quickly and lost out. I mean, this Ford C100, for example, was a pretty good car, except that they had designed it before they realized that they were allowed to use as much aero as they were, and so it had very little ground effect. But those cars had quite a lot of ground effect, and that's part of the reason why the crashes were so, I guess, so violent. It's like running a magnet car, you know. Your speed is very high until you lose your downforce.
Well, and plus, Dennis, I think those cars were also evolutions of the 917 line, so they were built to be as light as possible as well.
Oh yeah, well, any race car is built to be as light as possible.
Yeah.
You know, that hill on the Mulsanne that they used to take off on, they eventually flattened it out. They took 8 meters off the height of that hill.
Wow.
In order to stop it, because when the Mercedes flipped, the problem with the Mercedes, I was watching a documentary on this. Problem with the Mercedes, which was a LG, it was a LMP GT class, wasn't it? And I guess the successors of Group C, but they were running the body neutral. They usually run about 1 to 2 degrees of downwards, so that the front of the car is lower than the back, so you get a vacuum ground effect. They ran it neutral because they had shorter wheelbase. They had longer overhang, so the diffusers would generate more downforce at the front and the back. The only problem is when they went over that hill, all of the front downforce disappeared, and because then the car raised a bit, the downforce at the back was overcome by the upforce at the front because the car was running neutral. So effectively, the car started generating lift, which is why it flipped over backwards 3 times before it landed on its wheels in the trees.
Yeah, was that Mark Webber who was the acrobat behind
No,
the
Mark Webber did that in. He only flipped it once in qualify. He actually flipped it on the warm-up lap.
That's
so
what it was, right?
Start. I can't remember the name of the guy who did actually do, but apparently he was hospitalised, but with minor injuries. But he actually.
The driver got out of the car and was smoking a cigarette sitting on the what do you call it, fender of the front of the car.
Probably because they crashed it. They flipped it 3 times in that race.
Yeah.
So once in practice, once in the warm-up lap, and then the big one. Only when they flipped it a 3rd time did they withdraw the other car.
Yeah.
But basically, they were running it neutral. So as soon as it lost any downforce, it was going to fly. Yeah.
And this is, of course, now why the front fenders of the LMPs have got an open panel at the top to let the air out.
Yeah.
So, John, have you been taking notes?
I have, and thankfully it's also being recorded. But yes, I have been feverishly, and my carpal tunnel's starting to act up.
Well, you can go back through the recording later.
I think, Greg, one of the complications is if you get into this and follow the history, the FIA plays silly bugger every couple of years with designations. So what was a Group C became this, became that, and there's GT1s, which is what the new Revo slot Toyota GT1 is. They are more similar than dissimilar, but certainly a progression through time. Most of them are 2-seater prototypes with a roof on They did, and they've come up with so many different names for what the class is over time that even guys who are involved in it like full time find it hard to figure out what the hell this should be called. So Group C is a designation probably, and I'd have to check. I think Group C the designation ended in 1987, I think. And, you know, a great era of cars, for Maurizio to pick, because there was 100 billion liveries and all the rest of the stuff, where, you know, some of the new stuff today, you know, there's one or two cars running around and, you know, a few liveries of each, and next year they all disappear at Le Mans. So.
Yeah, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, Porsche was like almost like a customer car, right?
Oh, the Porsches were probably, I mean, if you look at any grid in IMSA or whatever you want to look at, the Euro Series and all the rest of this stuff, half the bloody cars were Porsches. And they had more customer teams than, you know, you could shake a stick at. And great cars. And I think you'll find that elevation on the Mulsa has now been replaced by a chicane.
So they flattened it and chicaned it?
They were reaching so much, the speeds they were reaching were just getting ridiculous. So if you watched the race a couple of weeks ago, well, it's been there for a while, but there's a big chicane in there now. So.
I think Webber said he was doing 300 kilometers an hour when suddenly he saw sky.
Yeah.
So that's what almost 200 miles an hour.
Yeah. Then he had to do it again in a Formula One car.
Yeah, but at least they got a damn sight more ground effect.
I'm at the flip.
All right, yeah.
Well, that was a good conversation starter. Anybody else got any conversation starters or questions or show and tell or anything you want to go over? Should we take a lesson in gearing from Chris? I know he's pretty good about his gear knowledge. John said, "Ooh, Chris, do you want to give us a 101 on gear ratios and teeth matching?"
Well, it's. I mean, if anybody has any questions, probably better than me just rambling on about gear ratios for hours and hours and stuff like that. It's important to pick the right gear ratio. How about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you have a gear ratio of 3, some people will argue that if you have an 8 tooth pinion and a 24 tooth main gear, or you have a 10 and a 30, the effect is the same. Other people say it's very different and affects the braking. In theory, it's the same ratio of engine revolutions to wheel revolutions. Does it make a difference, or are they blowing smoke?
For the type of racing that most of us do now, it really doesn't make a bloody difference.
Right.
There are some theories and again, theory and practice is often two different things. If you use a smaller diameter pinion and a smaller diameter spur, there is a less energy needed and less inertia to spin a small pinion and a small spur or contrate.
Right.
That said, with plastic tracks, when your car is bumping all over the place and not perfectly round tires, and the lack of precision, if you will, in the plastic sort of cars that most of us are now running, it really makes no difference whatsoever.
Yeah.
There are some peripheral things over and above gears that a smaller contrate and or a smaller spur can offer. So if you just take a 3-to-1 ratio, if you can use a smaller spur or contrate in diameter, that will do a couple of things. It allows you to run a slightly smaller diameter tire, if you will. For the same size tire, it will give you a little more track clearance. and allow you to run potentially a smaller diameter wheel with a slightly taller sidewall rear tire, which is a good thing because that adds compression to the tire, which helps out in handling and traction and a whole bunch of other things. In terms of if you took, Richard, any of the cars you showed us,
yeah,
and put a smaller diameter or a bigger diameter pinion on it, there's going to be bugger all real difference on that.
Yeah, I thought so, which is why I haven't messed about with it. But yeah,
I mean, if you started racing some of the stuff that Dennis frequently races, or I hope again get back into it, some of the quicker cars, you know, there's all kinds of little things that you know make a whole bunch of sense in terms of diameters of gears.
Yeah, and most of that is exactly that. It's in terms of diameters of gears, diameters of tires, and track clearance.
Right.
For example, I mean, if I was running a car with 64 pitch gears, which are a finer pitch than the stuff that we have in the 1/32 scale cars, the difference between running a 3.5-to-1 ratio with 64 pitch gears and running the same 3.5-to-1 ratio with 72 pitch gears is just about nothing on most tracks. The only difference there would be that if you were running a class where you are allowed to use really, really, really small clearances, like Eurosport, where you're allowed to use 32 thousandths clearance under the car, then you go to finer and finer pitches to get smaller and smaller driven gears so that you can use smaller and smaller tires. And that starts to lower the center of gravity of the rear axle, because you can now move the rear axle closer to the track. But as Chris said, all of that is, you know, it's diminishing returns. If you're looking for something to gain you a second a lap, that's not the place to go looking. If you're looking for something to gain a tenth of a second a lap, maybe that's a good place to go looking.
Yeah.
And Richard, when Dennis talks about 64, 72, 82, 80 pitch gears, do not think about putting any of those on the cars that you run.
The only thing I would do would be to replace it with slotted gear. Most of the classes we run, we actually specify you should maintain the gear ratio, because we're just trying to level the playing field as much as possible.
Yeah.
The best way to gain half a second on a lap is actually learn to drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not come out.
Yes.
The other thing that I see a lot of in some of the proxy races and on some of the forums and the chat lines is that guys get too hung up on a gear ratio all by itself. Sort of a rule of thumb is you have to gear to what the motor, you have to gear in accordance to the motor you have in your car.
Yeah.
So if you've got an 18,000 RPM Scaly, you can run that down to, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7 to 1. If you put in a 30K motor, you're going to have zero brake, zero acceleration. So each motor has an ideal place that it wants to run at. And electric motors basically like to run flat out. So if you put a 30K NSR S-can in there and geared it 2.5 to 1, it's just working too hard. It'll never get to top speed. It'll overheat. You won't have brakes. And so it's great to talk about gear ratios, but the first thing I always say to guys is, okay, great. What motor are you running?
Yeah. I will quite often change the motor. I don't tend to mess about too much with gearing. So I've had too many bad experiences with bad meshes. So I tend to go with whatever came with the car, and I'll actually move motors around. In fact, there's with Scalies, there's such a variation that it's quite often worth trying out 2 or 3 motors to find one that behaves as you want it to behave, and the other motor goes into your backup car.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for, you know, for most club tracks, most plastic tracks, even most club wood tracks, anything around the 3-to-1 ratio, which is basically bog standard for most of the manufacturers, is absolutely fine. And there's a lot of other things I would try and direct you to on the car other than changing a tooth or here or that, way before changing a gear ratio.
Yeah.
You know, and if you do collect gears, which is, I collect gears, I got lots of them. If you're buying gears for the kind of stuff we're running, the difference between a 28 tooth contrate and a 27 or a 29 is bugger all.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to buy gears, skip a tooth. So in your box, carry a 26 tooth, a 28 tooth, and a 30 tooth. There's one tooth is going to do nothing for you.
So, Chris, so you, instead of gear ratio, would you focus on the dynamics of the car, or what would you focus on to get a lower lap time?
Well, I mean, this goes back to, you know, gear ratios and motors. I personally believe that most motors that come in most cars are more than good enough for most trucks. You know, most guys run on a 10 or 12 foot straightaway max. So if you pick up 4 inches with a more powerful motor and lose 1.5 feet on the corners, it really doesn't make much sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
As well, I find most guys in our clubs, you know, typically everybody wants the big monster horsepower down the 8 foot straightaway, right? And it's really hard to get guys away from that. Over time, we've switched guys. We run a class at Arts and all the rest of the clubs in Toronto that you know of. And we run a Group C class, which is a 23,000 RPM motor. And in a lot of cases, we also run a class which is 60s sports cars with a 14K BWA motor. The difference in lap times, well tuned, is 1/10 to 2/10 of a second. Because the other guy, you know, most of the guys come out of the corner and hammer it, and the car goes sideways, 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 sideways. The little motor just goes down the straightaway. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, and back to gearing again, the other thing that affects gearing, yeah, well, there you go. I mean, you don't need an 18K motor is plenty for that crap, Greg, if the car is set up well. So is it flat? Are the wheels and tires round? You know, does the guide sit in the track the way it should be? Is it properly weighted? There's a billion things you need to do before you need to start changing your motors or your gears.
Yeah.
So size doesn't matter. It's all about tuning.
Well, depends who you talk to.
But yeah, I would agree with what you say on the standard plastics. I mean, our club track is, because we race digital, it's not as long as a lot. Ours is about 25 meters. It's got a 5 meter straight, and the rest of it is twisty bits, including a couple of radius 1 hairpins back to back, which is always good fun. But we have a tuning class where you can put whatever gears, whatever motors, whatever on it. And guys will put a 30K motor in, and they'll have their ass handed to them by somebody running a standard Scaly 18K, because it's just not drivable.
Right.
I think that the fastest motor you can reasonably drive on our track is a 25K Shark S-Can, or a 22K Long Can, because it's got so much more torque. Anything more than that, and you actually spend more times in the weeds. And actually, when you look at our endurance races, most of our races our heats are between 5 and 15 minutes. When you look at the fastest lap, the guy with the fastest lap very rarely wins the race, because he's doing 2/10 faster, and he's coming off, and he's losing 7 seconds, which takes him 70 laps to make up.
No, for sure. There was a club opened in Toronto maybe 10, 12 years ago, and they had a good turnout, and I discovered the club and went out there and learned about their rules. And they had, you know, specific motors for specific classes, and I said, can you put a slower motor in? And they looked at me like I was just like are you, you know, sure, go right ahead. So I put in a motor that was 2/3 of what most of these guys, and it was, again, it was a wood track, but short, you know, 8-foot straights and zigzags and twists and turns and all the rest of the stuff. I can't remember what I put in, but I probably put in, you know, a 15,000, 16,000 RPM motor, and went out and just walked away from it. After they banned slower motors putting in the car.
Way to go, Roger Penske. Way to go, Roger.
All the guys already had, like, the, you know, the slotted oranges or whatever they were running at the time, and they just didn't want to make guys go and spend a whole bunch more money. So I understood it from that perspective. But
now, Chris, would the same hold true for like a rally course as well, since it's so twisty?
Yep. You want, I mean, like in 1-to-1 cars, it's always better to go forward than sideways.
Yeah.
Your lap times are you know, and again, the little 14K motors, you come out of the corner and punch it, and they're so slow, the car just goes straight down the straightaway.
No, you're absolutely right. I can tell you categorically, if you're sliding, you're slow.
Well, that's it. And, you know, a lot of drivers have, again, everybody wants to watch me go down this 8-foot straight, man. I'm going to just hammer it down here. And, you know, invariably you stand at the end of the corner with your catcher's mitt on and grab the car as it flies by you. And the poor little guys with the 18Ks are just going around and around and around and around and around.
Yeah, people with big motors also tend to overbrake, in my experience. So they go past you on the straight, and then as soon as you get into the bend, you're going past them because they've overcompensated, and you've just maintained your momentum.
Well, that's how Porsche established themselves in racing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and especially, Richard, if you do not change the gear ratio, because the 18K motor that you use in your Scaly geared 3-to-1, if you pop in a 30K NSR in place of that and use the stock gears, it's going to go like hell eventually, but it's not going to stop.
No.
So your braking distance is, you know, early.
Yep.
There's an old saying in racing, smoother is faster.
Well, that's you know.
The guys at my club still don't get that. The newbies always tend, because they come from analog, they tend to have an on-off driving style, or from racing at home with magnets, it's very much on-off. And they don't figure out that I very rarely go above 3/4 throttle, but I very rarely go below 1/4. I'm almost never off the power, even on the bends, because it's maintaining the momentum. They'll come right off, overcompensate, then they'll hoof it to try and catch back up with you. And of course, when you're playing catch up, you're crashing more.
Yep. I used to have kids in the neighborhood that would come over Saturday mornings. So I built a couple of controllers with a little screw behind the trigger so I could move that in and out to limit throttle response. So you couldn't go full blast. So I substituted a couple of those controllers for a couple of our club guys so they could only go 3/4 throttle. And I kid you not, all of them went quicker and all of them stayed on and vastly improved their lap times.
Yeah.
I did the same thing or a similar thing here, just by turning the voltage down.
Yep.
Of course, when you race digital, when you're on 3/4 throttle, you're using half the fuel than when you're on full. And that's the other thing about when you're using a fuel strategy, that actually by going 0.2 of a lap slower than other people, you're using half the fuel. So when they pull into fuel for 30 seconds, you rack up 4 laps and go past them.
Yep.
That's what makes those Ninco Classics such fun cars to drive.
Yes.
Good stuff. I need to clean off my track so I can pull the trigger on a car. It's just covered with crap right now. Oh, Slothead joined in.
Greg.
Any
All right,
track
peace.
builders tuned in today? Any track builders with us today? If so, any thoughts on using clear polyurethane to seal MDF versus sealing and priming first, then painting? My current track project is a replica of a dirt oval, and I like the MDF color. The back and edges of the track sections have already been painted with white sealer and primer.
Maybe Phil can help with that.
I like it.
Or Dennis, yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you just want to keep the color of the MDF and just put a clear polyurethane on it and be done with it, it'll probably work fine.
This is a question.
You may need to. What I would do anyway would be to put down one layer of clear and then let it set very well, and then I would sand it all, because I think that the first layer of clear onto raw MDF will leave a bit of a stippled surface. But in theory, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Dennis, does it matter if it's matte or gloss?
Probably not for us. It'll be more about the look than it will be about the performance, I would think.
I would disagree a little bit. I think I gather this question's from Slothead, and tires make a big difference. If you are running on a foam tire or a silicone tire, the smoother, glossier surface will tend to be better. If you're running on rubber or urethane, a matte surface is probably more acceptable. Not that they can't work well, but I mean, the best surface you could ever have for a silicone tire is glass.
Be interesting.
And for a well-prepared sticky rubber tire, the best surface is gloss.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know the purpose of this track, because I've built MDF rally tracks, and the idea is not to have too much grip. Otherwise, you'll never get around the tightest of the hairpins.
Yeah.
And I found a silk varnish is really good for letting the car unstick on the bendy bits. But obviously, if you want lots of grip, then what the guys just said, if you don't want grip, then you probably want to go the opposite if it's for a rally track, because you do want to slide.
Yeah.
He said it's for a dirt oval, so that's definitely a slidey kind of racing. So I would almost just leave the MDF bare. That'll get them sliding.
That would be that would be a very interesting, it could get too much wear eventually, but it would be an interesting concept to try.
You can get an Mdf sealer. It's quite thin stuff that soaks into the MDF and stabilizes it, so it doesn't actually affect the surface. It does stop it getting damp and warping.
And it's clear.
After seeing that video with flour, why don't you just spread cocoa everywhere and go crazy?
I have to. He says his current oval cars have silicone tires, mostly Max Tracks, Indie Grips, and Quick Slicks. So what are you going to get slide out of with silicone tires?
Then I would go with the matte clear rather than the gloss clear.
Yep. And it looks better too.
Mm-hmm.
We used cocoa powder for the dirt rallies.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Where we used regular flour for the snow rallies. So.
Geez, I was just kidding. Are you serious? You use cocoa?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or coffee grounds.
Yeah. Gave you an interesting smell when you were racing. So.
Good Lord! All you need, that's hilarious. The Italian cars would be making coffee.
But you do have to pressure wash your car's innards afterwards.
That you did. It always paid to have a can of air with you.
See, the Canadians would just sit around in the cold weather and drink the cocoa.
The Aberstone Club near me has got a rally track with water, and you do actually run the car through water.
What is it like? Is it like a puddle, or is it running water? Or how does it work?
It's like a puddle. You basically go around a bend for a distance of maybe 2 or 3 feet through about 1 to 2 inches of water.
The ditch.
Yeah, they use deionized water, so there's no issues with shorting or whatever. But yeah, I'm sure you have to very carefully clean your motors out afterwards.
Especially if it's followed up by flour or chocolate.
Can you imagine flour or cocoa and the water trap all at once?
You know what? I mean, I'm sure at some point, and no offense, Leo, the Scots would probably deep fry it, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Scotch egg time.
You might get some very interesting wet mud effect around your tyres building. Your tyres probably end up a couple of millimeters larger in diameter after that.
Yeah. The powder is messy enough. I can't imagine sludge.
Never mind the poor track owner who has to clean up the after race.
And a vacuum would be a pain in the butt enough, but I don't know, wet vac and then wet wipes and all kinds of.
Never mind going to the grocery store. Can I have 65 bags of flour and cocoa, please?
I do wonder about the flour over the track rails, whether the arcing starts to cook the flour, because obviously you got to get electrical conductivity, and there must be quite some sparking going on.
Well, we didn't have any problems with that other than you had to really spend time on adjusting your braid so that it would kind of act like a snow plow, so that you were getting contact. Otherwise, you get a lot of chatter in the car because it was making and breaking contact.
Well, there's a really good question. Like, wouldn't the braids get gummed up?
Well, they would, but as I said, if you prep them right, it acted a little bit like a snow plow, and then the back part of the braid would actually get the electrical contact. So,
were you allowed to put like a cow catcher or a scraper on the front of the guide or not?
Probably wouldn't want to be in the track all the time.
And all of a sudden, everybody's smelling burnt toast.
Yes,
it's best to have a sort of course car and send that round for a few laps first to clear the rail, rather than sort of sending in the competing cars first to do the cleaning up.
Does it stay relatively consistent then from one entrant to the next?
Surprisingly, yes. I mean, if it's a long event and there are a lot of cars competing, then yeah, it's worth topping up the flour or the cocoa powder after maybe 10 cars or something like that. But if it was just home racing, then.
Now, Leo, have you ever put water down as well? I mean, because rally tracks have water. And
no, I have not.
Because I know when I was younger, we used to sort of emulate wet races by putting, a Scotch tape on the rear tires, right? So that the car would have very little grip.
Yep. That's quite good fun. And of course, if you have older cars with hardened tires, that can be great fun for a few laps. Just driving around with the thing fishtailing all over the track.
When I was racing in South Africa years back at national championships now, in those days we were running foam tires on tracks that had been prepared with a spray the same way as, with a spray traction compound the same way as commercial tracks are done here. And we would run the whole weekend, and once we were done, we would start to celebrate after the prize giving was done and everybody had a couple of beers. Then we would have these challenge races, and you'd get two teams of two guys. One guy standing on the driver's podium driving a car in like on the very inside of a 4-lane track, and another guy driving a car on the very outside of the 4-lane track. And the other two members of the teams were stationed around the track with little squirt bottles of lighter fluid. And the idea was that you started the race and these two guys would race against each other while the two teammates were strategically spraying some lighter fluid onto the track to dissolve and wet the traction compound, which would cause the car to spin around in great spins. And so the team that managed to successfully complete a lap, despite all the sabotage from the other team, were declared the winners. until one time a car for some reason or another, generated a spark, and the lighter fluid caught fire. And eventually we decided that that was enough of that particular entertainment, and we didn't do it again. But it was a lot of fun.
Suddenly you have a Tesla going down the road that's just been hit by something.
It was really
How many beers was that after, Dennis?
Oh man, I think we'd long since forgotten to count by the time we started those.
Well, I would suggest so. Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun.
I remember racing at karts at Castle Combe. This is full-size karts now, the local track where I used to live. And we were doing some corporate racing, and it got round to the finals. And when we were racing around, all of a sudden the marshal started kicking the tyres that were barriers around the track. You wonder, what the hell are they doing? And then when you came around the next time, you realised it had been raining the previous night, and the tyres were full of water. And what they let us do half the race, and then they kicked the tyres to get all the water out, which ran across the track. And you came down the long straight, which was downhill, into a bend that took you back uphill, only to find it was soaked in water, which was very entertaining. I ended up facing the wrong way and then running head on into a guy coming the other way. We both ended up swapping the numbers that were on the front of our carts because we hit each other so hard. But they didn't tell us they were doing this. They just thought they'd have a bit of fun. And it was a bit of a shock, I can tell you.
I can imagine.
That's actually a good, when you're racing karts the next time, that's actually a good way to clean your tires. And then you'll get absolute, like, especially a slick, and you get tons of grip and you'll do really well. But the first like maybe 20 seconds is a bit tough. But after that, you've got tons of grip.
Yeah, we do that with our 132nd cars quite a bit.
You wet them down, or?
Yeah, we'll either clean them off on a wet towel or something, or we'll do the old thumb lick and rub the tires, and then just set it right down on the track and pull the trigger, and it goes.
Martin, who's occasionally on here, used to lick his tyres until he figured out it was easier to lick his thumb and then apply it to the tyre.
Yeah, but so you get the taste of cocoa, coffee, and flour. What's the big deal?
No, I think it was the lighter fluid that was the main attraction.
I'll tell you, if you started using lager, you'd have a lot more guys licking tires.
Yeah, we had one of the guys in my club did the tire licking until, yeah, he switched to thumbs. It was, tires are gross. Don't lick tires. Everybody watching this, don't lick the tires. Do something else. Don't lick the tires.
I remember there was like an icon or a GIF that circulated on the forums at one stage. It said, "Don't lick the tires." Looked a little bit like the Rolling Stones sticky fingers icon with a slanted line through it.
Guys,
I don't know.
I have something to share, Greg. If once we run out of conversation,
go for it.
Right, I want to show you a little item here, which is about 20 millimeters across. What it is, it's a bridge rectifier, so it will work off of a digital AC or a DC signal. It's a voltage regulator, and which puts out 5.5 volts into a supercapacitor. I want to share with you the effect of a supercapacitor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug my supercapacitor arrangement here onto a breadboard, which has got an excessive number of LEDs on it. So I'm going to go away and plug it into my power supply for 20 seconds, and I'm going to come back.
Yeah, supercapacitors are basically batteries that hold a charge for a short period of time, and they charge very quickly, and they disperse the power efficiently, you know, as needed. I've used them in some of my laser tag guns that when the batteries are jiggled too much, the laser tag gun would freeze. So we figured out how to install a supercapacitor between where the batteries go and the CPU, and it's much smaller than what he's showing. So I would imagine that supercapacitor is capable of running those LEDs for minutes after he's got them fully charged off of the power. I'm expecting those to go for minutes because one like a quarter of the size would keep a laser tag gun going for multiple seconds.
So that is 20 seconds at 12 volts, and I have 8 LEDs hooked up, some of which are flashing, some of which are solid. The supercapacitor is that's a 1 farad. Most capacitors are about 1/100th of that size, and you can see they're going like crazy still. Which means with digital, because you have lights on all the time anyway, but when you come off the track, and especially when you're night racing, your lights are still going. With analog, of course, when you come to a stop or you're off the throttle, the lights will still light. I mean, the 1 farad is probably overkill, but they're not very expensive. But it's a very simple circuit, and if you went for the smaller capacity, you could have a smaller voltage regulator. But I can't solder surface-mounted components very easily. But I'm going to put this in the back of. I've got a Ninko Hummer police Hummer, which has got loads of room in the back of it. So this is going to sit in the back, and it's going to power flashing white headlights, flashing red and blues on the front, on the top, and in the rear, and the rear lights. So there's going to be about 10 LEDs all powered off of this device sitting in the back of my Ninko Hummer.
Now, Richard, how heavy are those?
Good question. I will tell you. I will get my thing and weigh it for you.
I'm going to say 10 grams.
Not much. Yeah,
not even that. I wouldn't.
That's it.
Only because the capacitor is on the heavy side.
Mm-hmm. But 1 farad is massive.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, normally
7.2 grams.
Yeah.
And that is a massive capacity. You could get them half the size and half the capacity. But
you don't even need the LEDs running that long.
No, you wouldn't. So the thing is, with most capacitor circuits, they're tiny, but you can actually buy. Here's a slightly smaller one. It's about half the size of the big one.
So that would fit in a car quite easily then, the small one.
Yes, and you can get, this is only 0.1 of a farad, which isn't enough. But you probably want half a farad, but you can get them that size, half a farad, which would be enough. I think with the smaller capacity ones, in theory, they can power it, but they lose their peak voltage quite quickly. And if you have a 1 farad, it doesn't lose its peak voltage till it's about 3/4 discharged. So yeah, that seems to work quite well. I am working on a slightly smaller version, but using micro components, because I've got a 2.7 volt capacitors that have 3 farads in them, believe it or not. I can find them. Yeah.
How big are those?
I'll show you now.
Oh, sorry.
Don't they make, I mean, like the capacitors that I use for my laser tag guns were rated for at least 9 volts because that's what they were getting. And we didn't use a voltage regulator or bridge rectifier or anything because it didn't need it. It basically just plugged the capacitor in,
They're quite expensive. I was looking for 12 volt capacitors, and they're outrageously expensive. Yeah, that is a different format. It's probably the same sort of bulk, but that's actually a 3 farad capacitor, 2.7 volts. So actually, you could, in theory, put it straight in line with the LEDs. You just need to supply it with 2.7 volts. And I think if you use with a Zener diode, if you put a Zener diode the wrong way round, it will act as a voltage regulator. So if you can get one that's rated at 3 volts and you pump 12 volts through the Zener diode in the wrong direction, it leaks 3 volts. So anything between 5 and 35 volts, it will let 3 through. And then you've got something that's small that could be wired directly. You wouldn't need resistors for the LEDs then, which will save you a bit of space. But I've yet to try that circuit.
They would work really well even in the Gunzi Sanjo American 60s cars because there's so much space.
Yes, Yeah, I mean, if you've got that much space, because LED. Now, the reason I've done this separate from the LEDs themselves, because obviously you can just wire it. You can run the LEDs in parallel off of this. So what I've got is I've got the two connectors off the which goes from the guide. Whether it's, and it'll work on a car. If you've got a DPR car and wire it over the guide, it'll work whether you're running it analog or digital. And then those two pins here, which are the positive and negative feeds for the LEDs. And if you use these little connectors, the what are they? DuPont connectors, you can run those in over to your LEDs.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just a little messy. I think this whole all the components for this, I think they cost me about £3.
Now, are you putting one in your tow truck as well, Richard?
Yeah, the next version of the tow truck will have this sitting underneath the deck because there's loads of space for it. Yeah, my Ninka Hummer's going to get one. I've also got an old NASCAR which I'm going to convert into a police cruiser. So plenty of room in that.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of the scaly Ford Tauruses which I might convert into a police cruiser. And of course a pace car as well. So I could I've got flashing yellow lights or orange lights that I can put on and make a pace car. I've got an SLR Mercedes that is crying out to be turned into a pace car.
Very cool. Very cool.
Well, we're going to circle back real quick to the track building thing. Slothead asked, why aren't foam tires a popular option for home track racing these days?
Well, so I mean, I love sponge tires, and most of my racing has been done with sponge tires. Simple answer is that they generally work best with some sort of traction compound, whether it's castor oil or whatever you want to use. They're not at their best when they're dry. So what that does is the traction compound gets on the track, it holds dust, it gets on the rails, it does a bunch of bad things, so you do need to clean the track more often. And sponge tires wear out quickly. You know, this is, I guess, from Slothead again, and I guess he's thinking on running on silicone tires. They'll last you. Your kids will be running on the same pair of, you know, your grandkids will be running on the same pair of silicone tires, where that's not going to happen with the sponge tires. That said, a sponge tire, lightly treated, to my way of thinking, just transforms a slot car. They run so much better. So
I'm a big fan of the Scale Auto foam tires. Is pretty popular in our club, and they hook up on practically everything. All you got to do is clean them with some ladder fluid, and they're just awesome.
Yep. Chris, is it also because of like the cushioning or suspension effect of the foam?
Yeah.
Well, that's the biggest thing with foam. I mean, that's where, yes, a foam tire, when you go around a corner, the outside rear tire will compress, which takes vibration out of the chassis. It loads more progressively. It gives you more grip. It gives you a smoother ride. It really makes the cars much nicer to run on. But they do wear out fast. You know, there's lots of dynamics that, you know, our 32nd scale or any car with hard tires, and I'm calling rubber, urethane, silicone, I think they're all hard. They're all comparatively hard tires. It needs an entirely different chassis setup than a sponge tire. When you go around a corner with hard tires, the inside tire tends to lift. So unless you don't have the front tires on the ground acting as outriggers to stabilize the cars lift up on one tire and get squirrely and all the rest of the stuff. With sponge tires, because the outside compresses, you don't need the front tires to touch to act as stabilizers. The car will go on an angle and compress, and Dennis will affirm that you go to any commercial raceway and watch guys who have been running and running and running and running and running on sponge tires, they wear into cone shapes. So you can see where the car is tilted when it's gone around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jen, I would agree with what Chris has said in terms of certainly for home racing sponge foam tires is not what I would consider an answer for those reasons that you know, if you let's say for example you really did want to run foam tires at home, then the first thing that you'd have to do would be you need a good gloss surface on the track. Second thing you need to do, if you're not going to put any kind of traction compound on the track itself, you need to be sure that, number one, the foam that you're using is the softest that you can get. You probably will need to do a little bit of treatment of the foam itself, either with cleaning with lighter fluid, as Greg was saying, or preferably actually rubbing some high SPF factor suntan lotion into them, and then wiping that off, because it helps to clean out the pores of the rubber and it softens the rubber. And the traction that you get from a foam tire is pretty much from those little open pores gripping the track, and they lose their grip as soon as those little air pockets or pores start to get full of junk. It's just too much in terms of maintenance and preparation, I think, for most of us, where we are already getting pretty good performance out of rubber or silicone or urethane. And it's just another one of those things. You know, if one guy does it, everybody's got to do it to be competitive. And eventually you have the same competition amongst less people for more money. And that's not necessarily where we want to go.
Another option for Slothead, if you're listening or if he's gone or whatever, use some silicone coated sponge tires.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he was just asking about. He says, is this why silicone over foam Pro Stalker tires are the best of all on my current oval?
Yes.
But you're getting both the best of both worlds. You're getting all of the cushioning and deformation and the smoothness that comes from that Chris was talking about, with all of the traction and grip that the silicone has on a clean surface.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, silicone coated foams are great. Same way as the foam inserts that I put under rubber tires sometimes, they're also great. Because you get the rubber tire grip with the foam tire deformation and cushioning.
Just a quick one for you, Dennis. Are you Ernie is now he's now making these things, the little rubber rings.
Yeah.
I don't know if he told you about that.
Yeah, he sent me a photo the other day.
Okay.
Guess where he got the idea from?
Sorry?
Guess where he got the idea?
Well, that's debatable.
Oh, okay.
I'll send you some.
Okay. I know he talked about them in February when he was down with me.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that he'd done it already.
Yeah.
Slothead says, thank you. They're so sticky, it's really hard to get them out of the plastic bag.
Mm-hmm.
Inside out, brother.
When I was a little sidebar story here. When I was a kid, I worked at probably one of the best commercial tracks ever. It was in Lauren Park on the west end of Toronto, and that was when I said I worked there. I was probably 11 when I worked there. I got to fill up the chocolate bar shelves and clean the washroom. So, but you know, I'm going to say I was working at a slot car shop. But the cool thing was that I used to get.
Hold on, isn't that the same job?
Well, sort of. I used to get all my free track time and free chips and pop, and I got all my, it was kind of cool. But the biggest thing was the big guys used to help me out. And in those days, the silicone coated sponge tires were the best on our track because it was a high gloss polyurethane. I was actually epoxy paint finish with no coating on it. And to get the good tires, we would get all these silicone coated sponge tires in, and you would take pairs out and put them on the front of the display cabinet glass, which was completely vertical. And good pairs of silicone coated sponge tires would slowly walk down the vertical part of the glass. So, you know, people used to come into the store and there's all these tires like creeping down the front of the display cases. So, and they were very cool. You know, the silicone coated sponge work, the best tire in the world for HO cars. You know, and they're great today. If you're going to use those, and you want the ultimate grip, again, it's better to go with a high gloss, smooth surface.
You can make those silicone coated sponge tires yourself as well.
Yeah, flowable silicone over foam.
Not that difficult, yep.
But I remember not too long ago, I swear that a tire was being made, I think it was for HO scale, but it was like made out of that sticky gummy stuff that they make kids' toys out of, the slappy hands and frogs and stuff.
Okay.
I'd swear I saw somebody making tires out of that stuff.
Possible. I tell you though, for most like for the high-end HO cars, you can make your tires out of plywood. It doesn't make any bloody difference at all because there's so much magnetic stick on the things, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a different kind of magnet racing, that. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
When you need an anti-brake in your controller.
That's it.
Well, I believe we have a new person joining us, Scott Smith. I don't think you've been on before. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your slot history, Mr. Smith? Your
slot history. I started racing 32nd scale, in the mid 90s, I guess, with Alan Smith in the Seattle Tacoma area. You know, raced actively in the club there, and then moved to the wilds of central Montana where there is no racing. I get together very periodically with Jim Hansen, Dennis Sampson, and maybe a couple of the others of you are familiar with Jim. And now I'm trying to get together with him more often and get involved in building some of the cars that he's been building. They drive very, very nicely. I enjoy them a lot, and we'll kind of get back into slots in that manner.
Are you in you got your own Big Sky out there in Big Sky country, or can you drive to a friend's house?
Yeah, a mere 5 hours, 5.5 hours, I'm at Jim's.
You're in Billings, right, Scott?
That is correct.
Yeah, good to meet you. Hi. Actually, I've actually just finished doing some work for Scott. I sent him up a couple of motor brackets and bits and pieces to help him in this process of starting up scratch building again. If you guys were on Scale Slot Car Illustrated back then, you would remember Noisy Muse. This is the man. Correct?
That is correct. I was Noisy Muse starting in the late 90s, and I was doing a line of resin conversion bodies for the Scalextric Trans Am cars.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Smith.
There's some history.
Are you still casting? Or are you?
The plan is to get back into it. The materials have changed a little bit. The product that I used for my molds is no longer available. But I do definitely plan on doing some. Jim and I are currently working our way through 50s sports cars. So my sickness, for whatever reason, is Corvettes. So I need to do a number of resin Corvettes. I've already got a 58 or a 59 for one of the proxy races 15 years ago, 14 years ago. They did the proxies, and I think I might have won it. I can't remember exactly, with my purple People Eater Corvette.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, the good news too is when you make a resin Corvette, you're making a real Corvette.
As long as you put a bit of fiber in it.
Absent the weave, yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, so we'll get back into casting. At this point, the idea is to kind of get the chassis down now. So I've got, well, for a variety of reasons, I was going to make a short production run of those purple People Eater Corvettes. So I have, I don't know, a dozen and a half, maybe 2 dozen Ninco Corvettes sitting in boxes, you know, all brand new in the case still. And I grabbed one of those bodies to slap one of Jim's chassis under and see what we can do from there. And then I'll start casting over the winter and stuff.
Did they have the NC1 motor?
No, they had they'd gone away from the NC1 motors. I've actually got several of those new in the package as well, because the NC1 we were for our own racing in Seattle. We did a series of cars based on the Ninco Corvette Cobra or MRRC Cobra chassis that was front motor shaft drive that worked really well, and we did a bunch of 50s and 60s sports cars with those.
So you're the one who has all the NC1 motors.
I don't know about all of them, but I bet I got a dozen of them.
I think that's all of them.
I got a few if you want some, John.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
The Corvette had I think it's got pink stripes on it. It's like an NC2 motor, but it's not as powerful.
Yeah, those NC1 motors are great. Pretty much as soon as you drive an NC1 powered car, it's like, this is fun. I want to get some more of these motors. I mean, I've got a couple NC1s that aren't in a car. Both of my Ninco Classics are NC1. I got a couple of Ninco rally cars that are NC1.
NC1s at 16 volts. God, those things are so slow they can't get out of their own way.
Well, that's because you're putting too much tire on them, Dennis.
Yeah. No, I ran with a Far Out Club down here in Southern California for a while, and they had a class of Ninco cars with the NC1 in them, and it was like, to me, it was like watching paint dry to drive those things. Yeah. Anyway.
The reason we used those MRRC Cobra chassis for that series of car was that they were the easiest car in the world to change wheelbases on. You just cut it across the chassis, spliced in a piece of plastic, you know, whatever you wanted to increase it in wheelbase, and then epoxied in a couple of styrene tubes along the little channels on the side to stiffen it all up.
And then shorten or lengthen the drive shaft, right?
Well, just cut a piece of 78 thousandths piano wire and it'd wedge right into the spring, and the pinion, the 1.5 millimeter pinion would go right onto the end of it, or 2 millimeter, I'm sorry.
Cool. Anybody else got anything they want to show and tell or ask about or circle back on, or what you got, Russ?
Well, nothing to show and tell today. But I watched a video of a YouTube video of the 2018 Slot Car Festival in the UK. Is there anything in the US comparable? What is the biggest function in the United States?
It's probably going to be some random hobby show that we don't know about that just happens to have more slot cars than RC cars. But every hobby show that I'm aware of in this area, in our area, even ones that I have a friend who goes and does a table at those shows, brings his slot car stuff to sell. He's like the only slot car guy. Like there's not even any HO people. It's all RC and, you know, trains and Legos and whatever else. It's just, I don't know of any stateside slot car specific festival, and even the hobby festivals have very little slot cars.
I'm not sure
in
that
them.
even in any other country in the world right now that there's an event as close or as good as the Slot Car Festival in the UK.
I think the Germans come close. There's a couple of festivals in Germany that are quite big. But you're right, they do position Gaydon as the biggest slot car festival in the world. You know, whether it is or not is possibly debatable, but it is huge.
I think I've seen one or two things in either Italy or Spain that were basically just loads and loads of slot car tracks. You know, and there wasn't a big focus on retail so much as just coming in and enjoying the racing of slot cars. I don't. It might have been a vendor fair, you know, where like all the slot car vendors happen to be or something. I don't know, but and then you've got the giant, you know, huge racing events where they've got like a dozen replicas, you know, the same layout a dozen times in a giant arena area, and they've got hundreds of people coming to race at those events. That's Spain all the way.
Well, it's the biggest slot car market in the world, isn't it? Spain. It's bigger than any other. More people participate. It could be that there's no one show as big as Gaydon, because they have several shows a year that are probably just slightly diluted. But I think a UK isn't big enough to sustain more than 2 or 3 shows in a year in terms of the slot car fraternity, whereas I think Spain, the market is a lot bigger.
So Spain is actually bigger than the UK.
Yeah, in terms of slot car sales, yes.
Yeah.
I guess the UK also has the advantage that it's relatively small and relatively high density and relatively a lot of slot car people, given that Scalextric is there. They call slot cars Scalextric there, that Scalextric is so well known there, like Carrera in Germany. So more likely to get a Gaydon kind of thing actually happening in the UK. But where are you going to put something like that in the US? On a coast somewhere, and then everybody on the other coast isn't coming, you know, in the middle? No.
Vegas, wouldn't you?
Vegas, there you go.
That ends up being the problem, is the scale of distance. You know, I live in a state that's larger than the UK.
Yeah, the furthest anywhere, because Gaydon is right in the dead centre of England, about as central as you can get. So nobody has to drive more than 300 miles to get there.
Oh,
Hands up, who wants to go to Kansas?
Oh, Leo's the longest driver to get to Gaydon. How long do you have to drive to get to Gaydon, Leo?
About 5 hours, 6 hours. So it's quite a journey. It's an overnight stay at least, if not 2 overnight stays. And of course that just eats into the spending money for slot cars. So I've been once, went in 2015, thoroughly enjoyed it. But the reality is it's just too far away. And sadly there's nothing closer. The nearest specific slot car event is at a place called Wetherby, which the National Slot Car Collectors Club, NSCC as it's now known, they organise specific, I can't say that word specific, but they organise specific slot car swap meets. So I think they run about 5 a year or something like that, all in England, or Englandshire as we call it, but nothing north of Hadrian's Wall. So yes, Wetherby's the nearest. Wetherby's about 4 hours drive from here. I'm in Edinburgh, or just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. So.
It's all relevant, Leo. We haven't got anything in Wales at all, but it's all relevant because I don't think Americans don't bat an eyelid at driving for 10 hours.
Yes.
And I think we think 5 or 6 hours is the longest journey you'll ever make in your life, whereas it's probably a regular occurrence for our transatlantic cousins.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you get
I'm quite lucky with Gaydon. I'm quite lucky with Gaydon. Gaydon's about half an hour, 40 minutes away from me.
That's
all right. Yeah. It's got to be 3 hours for me from west to south.
Definitely on my bucket list, that's for sure.
Nick, I'll send you a list of things I'm looking for.
Send me a list and a check.
Yeah, you can actually provide a service, because the reality is, I'd probably happily pay for that, because paying somebody to shop for me would be cheaper than attending personally.
So, yeah, cheaper than traveling to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did that at the last one because a couple of the guys in our club couldn't get there, but they wanted to pick up some cars for our new classes. So I basically had them on FaceTime and got in there early and went round all the stalls saying, "Hey guys, anything catch your eye?" So it was virtual shopping. I just basically bought the stuff that they, I knew what they were looking for roughly, so I zeroed on it, bought the stuff that they wanted, and they just PayPal'd me the money straight away. It's great,
Yeah.
modern technology.
Yes.
Well, I've been to some train shows, and it's hit and miss on slot car items at a train show. So, with Dennis, there's nothing down in the LA area or LA basin?
No, in fact, we don't, I see announcements for swap meets and things, but it's always in the Midwest. Down here, there's basically nothing, I'm afraid. In our 132nd scale club racing scene, certainly in Southern California, is almost non-existent. It's a bit of a desert for that.
In the late 90s, early 2000s, John I can't remember the name of the track in Las Vegas.
Rad
Tracks did a convention for a few years. And it was kind of fun. It was reasonably well subscribed. I got to meet Rocky Russo and Larry Shepard both before they passed away.
Mm-hmm. Now those conventions were very much a vintage and scratch building convention. So it was a lot of vintage cars, and effectively it was a bunch of enthusiasts getting together and basically having scratch races and pickup races together and just showing off the cars and whatever. They were fun. The last one that happened was, I think, 2006 or so, or maybe seven it would have been, at Buena Park Raceway here in Southern California. And the biggest issue, and I think what basically killed the idea, was that at the time, this new genre called retro racing was starting up, and the guys who wanted to talk about vintage cars and run their vintage cars basically just got overwhelmed by the number of people who were there for retro and really had very little interest or motivation to talk vintage stuff, and it just never happened again, which is a pity. But Russell, you're right. I haven't seen anything, and I would dearly love something like that too.
Yeah.
This is probably directed towards Dennis or anybody else in the area. Slothead asks if the Slot Car Museum in LA is worth a visit. He's in Maine, but he does cross-country road trips every other summer. And
all right, I'll talk about the Slot Car Museum.
Yes.
The Slot Car Museum is the most mind-boggling experience you will ever have with slot cars in your entire life. It doesn't matter what kind of slot cars you're into, as long as you're into slot cars, that museum will blow your mind. It is first and foremost focused on the so-called golden era, that time in the late 60s, early 70s, of lots of commercial tracks and lots of manufacturers, and essentially 1/24 scale. But they have a lot of other displays. Number one, it's a private museum. It's owned by a fellow by the name of Scott Bader, who is a very wealthy local businessman who was a slot car racer as a kid and loved them, and unfortunately didn't get to play very much in those days because his father died while he was still at school, and he had to leave school to run the family business, which he then turned into this multi-million-dollar business. And he has spent the last 10 years or so building into the hill underneath his house. His house is on this very steep hill, right at the top of this very steep slope. And he basically excavated the entire area under the house and built this big concrete structure on 3 or 4 stories that houses his personal classic race car collection. It houses all of the workshops to maintain that race collection. It houses an area where he has a 4-lane Bob Scott slot car track, 1/32 scale slot car track, wood track, and then it has this single level for the museum. The museum is two pieces. There's an area which is all display cabinets and beautifully finished. I mean, the glass alone in that display room cost $100,000.
No, I'm sorry.
And then, apart from the museum, they have behind a restored bank vault door, they have this vault where all of the extra parts of that collection are gathered. And they have in that museum every car in every color, in every packaging, in every variation from every American manufacturer from 1960 through to about 1975. The number of cars, there are probably close on 1 million slot cars in that building. It is indescribable how much stuff there is. In order to visit, you need to get on the website and arrange a tour, because it's not open to the public just on a day. If you're down here, you need to plan ahead of time, and you need to request a visit. They are very accommodating with that. Either Scott himself or this fellow by name of Philippe de L'Espinay, who is the curator, will do it. It's normally Philippe that does most of the tours, and you know, he has been involved in the build up of this museum right from the beginning. So they both know a lot about what's going on, but it's just the most incredible place.
So doesn't Scott Bader, does he have anything to do with Electric Dreams? Did he?
Yeah, Scott Bader owns Electric Dreams.
Okay.
But Electric Dreams is a separate business. It's a 1/32 scale primarily slot car store. It's not located near the museum. Scott's house is up in North Hollywood. Electric Dreams is down in Lawndale near Los Angeles Airport. The two are not related to each other than Scott is the owner of both.
I think that answers Slothead's next question, which was, does the museum sell slot car stuff? I'm thinking that's a no.
That is a no.
Go to Electric Dreams if you want to buy slot cars.
Correct. But I mean, you could do a visit to Electric Dreams and to the museum all in one day. You need about 4 hours minimum at the museum. You will not get through a tour of the museum in under 4 hours.
Yeah, if you really play your cards right, maybe you can get Philippe to drive you from the museum to the Electric Dreams. We had the adventure of driving with Philippe in Los Angeles traffic in his minivan with the big brakes on it and stuff, and it was a truly hair-raising experience.
Oh, and it's gotten worse than that over the years. I would seriously warn anybody about ever climbing in a car with Philippe. He has suffered from macular degeneration, and he only has the use of one eye, but that has not affected his opinion of his driving abilities one little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of a way through the gift shop you don't want to go, huh?
Yeah, but no, there's no sales or anything at the museum at all. Everything's done at Electric Dreams. And of course, now at Electric Dreams, there's a very nice Gary Girding built 6-lane slot car track, which you can see on the Electric Dreams website or on their Facebook site. Very, very nice track, just finished. In fact, I finished the wiring of all the lap counting systems and computer controls and everything last week. And it has magnetic braid. So those people who like to run magnets can run magnets. It has a gloss surface. So with a quick wipe down to get rid of the dust, pretty much any tire works quite nicely. And it's a very nice track to drive on. It's basic. It's not a scenerized track. There's no scenery or anything like that. It's very much the commercial style track on legs, but it's beautifully made. It is very, very smooth. It runs really nice, and it's real fun to drive.
The talk about the slot car museum reminded me a lot of the LeMay Car Museum in my area in Tacoma, owned by LeMay, his huge local businessman for waste management and huge car collector, and he made his own museum for his car collection, basically. So you can go down. It's a fantastic building just to look at, architecturally speaking, but then you go into it and it's basically continuous ramps down from the top to the basement of his part of his car collection. They don't house the whole collection at the museum because his collection is too big for the building. They swap cars in and out. They've got their restoration and maintenance shop down in the basement, and they have a slot mods fully scenic track down in one of the levels as well for people to just hold the controller and watch the car go around on. But that's, if you're ever driving through the Seattle Tacoma area and you're a car enthusiast, you definitely don't want to miss the LeMay Museum. So if I'm in LA, I'm definitely going to hit up that slot car museum.
Oh, you have to. I mean, it's an absolute must for any slot car enthusiast.
Well, we're running down to our 2-hour mark. Does anybody have any last minute things they want to toss in or questions they want to ask before I hit the stop button?
Quick comment, non-slot car, but museum related. If you guys, has anybody been to the Revs Institute?
No, but I've perused their website quite a bit.
I go there, I go there 2 or 3 times a year. I'm in Florida for a couple of months a year, and I go there 2 or 3 times a year. It is absolutely mesmerizing. They have the biggest collection of, to name a few, they've got the biggest collection of racing Porsches in the world. They have all of the Cunningham cars.
No, they don't have all of them.
Well,
There's
most
in
of
Philadelphia.
Yep. Go to YouTube and look up the Revs, REVS Institute, and look at some of their videos and some of the stuff they have. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Very cool. So now our road trippers know some places to road trip to. And with that, we'll go ahead and stop the recording. As always, we'll hang around and chat as long as you guys like. But until next time, we'll say goodbye.
All right. Thank you, Greg.